Hello and welcome to Let Beauty Guide You, a podcast exploring tools and experiences that contribute to our health, wellness, happiness, and vitality in life. Today, I'm very excited to announce we have herbalist Michael Vertolli here to talk to us about herbalism, plant medicine, and what we can learn by communicating with plant spirits. So welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chelsea. It's great to be here.
So before we get started, let me give you a little brief introduction here. So Michael Vertolli is the founder and director of Living Earth School of Herbalism, which offers in-class and online classes and workshops, as well as a clinical diploma program in Western herbal medicine. And Michael has developed the 4 Elements Herbal Therapy, a system of herbalism which fuses the physiological approach of Western herbalist traditions with the holistic and spiritual practices of Indigenous healing traditions. And how did he do that? He apprenticed and continues to work with the elders of First Nations traditions in Ontario.
There was a few kind of Mickey Mouse correspondence courses, and if you wanted to do, to actually practice, you had to do a very eclectic approach. So in my case, for instance, I did pre-med at U of T.
Oh, wow.
And then did a lot of self-study and a lot of apprenticing. And then it wasn't until, probably in the 90s when various herbal programs and schools started to emerge that could provide comprehensive education. So, my background was really eclectic in terms of education that was available in Western herbalism. Most of it was, I would say, had elements of traditional European herbalism with a little bit of North American native traditions thrown in, and a very, very eclectic palette of herbs that were used. A few North American herbs and a few European herbs and a few Chinese herbs and Indian, Ayurvedic herbs, and that's kind of the way it looked. But part and parcel with my interest in exploring herbalism was my connection to nature. And I always had a very strong connection to the indigenous traditions of North America and had done a lot of ceremony and worked with various elders. But so for me, it was more about connecting to the land where I lived. So I had to spend years and years doing research on a lot of the native plants that live here because for most of them had become more or less absent in the literature. And as I learned more and more about plants, I found what was in the literature was significantly inadequate. So I spent a long time developing a relationship with, on many different levels, the plants that live in my local bioregion, and then over the years was able to, bit by bit, eliminate a lot of the plants that I was originally trained to use that came from other parts of the world. Not that they weren't good plants, they were, but for me, it's mostly about being connected to the land where I live, and as much as possible using plants that, if not are native here, that have naturalized here, or in some instances I use plants that are not native or naturalized here but can be grown here because I haven't found adequate equivalents in the plants that you can harvest here in the wild. So it kind of, what happened was there was this parallel things going on in my life where there was my traditional education, there was work I was doing with native elders, and there was just my own, you could say, personal path of connecting to the earth and connecting to nature, and part of that being connecting to the plants that live in the land where I live. And over the years, I was able to kind of merge all of those things together, so it becomes one. I don't know what to say. One approach that incorporates all of those different elements.
Right. So it became a new methodology almost, right?
You could say that. Yeah. Okay. Well, you had mentioned that I have a particular system that I practice that I call 4 Elements Herbal Therapy, and it is a unique system that draws from all of those different elements, and it was something that kind of gradually emerged, in the process of my own, work and practice and education, and just, connecting to the land and connecting to the plants.
And why did you think it was important to kind of integrate those Western herbalist traditions with that with those healing traditions of connecting with the plants and communicating in that way? Is there a specific reason why you thought it was important to integrate the two?
Yes, because although you could say that where my heart lies is more in the more traditional indigenous way of doing things, and of course that's not just in North America. We all have indigenous roots somewhere in the world. Although for those of us of European background, that largely started to disintegrate 2,000 years ago, or possibly even earlier. But the thing is that we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Modern medicine and modern medical science and physiology and pathology has brought forth a lot of very, very valuable information that's important. Although in many cases their interpretation and their approach to treatment is very different.
And when you say you didn't like the paradigm, are you referring to like that? I know in one of your lecture series you talked about the bullet approach. Like there's a symptom, and then we must just treat the symptom, as opposed to looking holistically at someone's lifestyle and what can be adjusted. Is that the paradigm you're referring to?
Yeah, the modern medical paradigm is very linear and reductionistic, and it treats people like biological machines. The information is very valuable, a lot of it, but it's the paradigm that I have issues with. So I found that it was very, very useful to incorporate a lot of that knowledge into a more holistic and traditional paradigm. Whereas, in traditional healing paradigms, we don't treat symptoms, we don't treat diseases, we treat people, and that is a much more complex approach, and their physiology and pathology, as it is understood in the modern medical paradigm, is useful. But also, people are much more than that. People are not just physical entities. We are also emotional, psychological, and spiritual. And what constitutes who we are, it involves various layers of relationship. The person doesn't end with their body and their thoughts. We also are integrated into the natural world and into the social world, and all of those are aspects of who we are and have to be taken into account if we're going to treat people in a holistic way.
So I'm curious to learn more about the Spirit of Herbs workshop, which I understand is a 6-day retreat where people learn how to communicate with plant spirits. So can you share more about what happens on these retreats and what kind of experiences people have?
Sure. I mean, to me, obviously, we have a whole integrated program for people who want to practice herbal medicine, and a lot of it is about, acquiring knowledge of plants and their properties and the human body and how it works and things like that. And if someone were to decide to approach herbalism purely on that level, they would still get results. But for me, what really constitutes the essence of herbalism is our relationship with the plants and with the natural world. And whether or not a person wants to practice as a herbalist, that what is offered in the Spirit of Herbs workshops is not just about practicing herbalism. It's really about a way of being in the world. And there's a lot of different layers to it, right? One of the challenges, if you look at it this way, there's a lot of people these days in the modern world. There's kind of a modern reductionistic scientific world view, And it's become kind of like a new dogma and a new religion. And you got all these people out there writing about and talking about how everything else that went before was basically based on superstition, and only science holds the truth. But if you really delve deeply into human history and into different paradigms and worldviews, what you realize is that the world presents itself to us according to the lens that we choose to focus on it. And so if we focus on the world from a reductionistic, materialistic point of view, then that's how the world speaks to us. That's what we see, and that's how we interpret things. And so, you could go into indigenous cultures, and they talk about, for instance, seeing spirits walking around and things like that. Well, from that modern worldview, Western worldview, the only way to interpret that is that that the people that live in those societies are experiencing some kind of a collective hallucination. But in reality, what's happening is that when we're born and raised in a particular way and taught to see the world in a particular way, then of course how we experience the world is going to be colored by that. So if we look at the world in a purely physical way, that's what we're going to see. So the challenge for people in the modern world is whereas the modern world has created a lot of benefits. We've got certainly aspects of modern medicine, emergency medicine that excels. And we have, all of our various technological things that we've developed that, have made life a lot easier in many ways. But what happens is that the way we're educated in the modern worldview is we're taught a particular very mental way of engaging with the world. Our education system nurtures our logical mind and a very logical, linear way of looking at things. And the cost of that has been a disconnection from our heart and a disconnection from other, you could say, capacities that we have to integrate or to experience the world in different ways. So unfortunately, what the end result of that is that we have a lot of technological toys, and we have a lot of physical affluence, at least some of us who are privileged to live in places like in Canada. But the cost of it is a loss of meaning and a loss of real connection to the world. And the end result of that, as we see, is that a lot of people are very unhappy. There's a increased incidence of anxiety and depression and suicide and drug addiction and all of these things that come from trying to engage with the world in a way that we've been taught, but realizing that there's something seriously missing with that. So in the spirit of herbs, although you could say the window that we use or the portal that we use for moving into that realm is people's interest in plants and working with plant spirits, the real purpose of those workshops is to open up the world to participants in a way of engaging with the world that they are able to experience more of what's actually out there than what we perceive with our physical senses. And that really is a two-part process. The first part of that is we need to utilize techniques, that we could call them meditations or whatever, as a way of calming down and silencing our logical mind, which is constantly, chattering and interpreting things, and at the same time utilize other techniques that allow us to connect with what's actually out there. And so that's essentially what we do. We utilize working with plants as a way of connecting with the world, and in the process, various techniques for, calming down our mind, opening up our awareness, and and of course, you always have to have a philosophical component to it, presenting a different way of looking at things. And what ends up happening is that, I could say that those workshops really open up things for people, and most people that experience them, find it to be a life-changing experience. And of course, all a workshop like that can do really is open certain doors for people. The real learning comes from taking what happens and learning how to integrate it into our day-to-day life. Because if we don't practice it, then it's very easy to kind of just fall back into our old patterns. And no matter how profound an experience a person has, it can kind of fade away when we jump back into our life, and it's so easy just to fall back into the patterns of the way we have typically done things.
Right.
But once the new patterns are in place, it's just as easy to live a healthy life as it is to live an unhealthy life.
Right. It's all about the choices you're making, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what I understand from what you just said is kind of like we live under this illusion of separateness, and by communicating with plants, it opens up that door to understanding that no, in fact, we are all connected. And even if we know that intellectually, when you feel it and experience it, like that's the access to transformation. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, it's easy to read books or to go to lectures, but at that point, all you've got is information. What makes it a living thing is to be able to, put it into practice. And although, as I said, the portal in Spirit of Herbs is herbs, everything that we do there can be applied to anything, connecting to the land, connecting to nature, and also connecting to ourself, because we're also a part of nature, and that's really important as well. Connecting to ourself as a whole being, as opposed to just our thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, we're very much in our in our mental body, right? Our
Yeah.
our thoughts. Yeah, we're very much in our heads. Um, yeah. So when people are doing the Spirit of Herbs workshop, are they learning more about the plants and learning more about nature, or like is there an actual like psychedelic experience, or like what does that connection look like?
We definitely don't do psychedelics. That those are, there are certain power plants that have been used in certain indigenous traditions around the world, and they have particular contexts and ceremonies that go with them. And of course, those people have particular relationships with them. But for me, what I feel is, although those things can be extremely useful, and in some traditions, if like for instance, the rage these days is things like ayahuasca. But if you go into these traditions, and where they have this profound relationship with these plant beings, what you'll find is that they don't create a dependency on them. They use them to help break down our day-to-day worldview and open us up to different ways of experiencing things. But what we don't want to do is to become dependent on these things. At least that's my own personal feeling, and it's been my experience as well. There are many, many, many indigenous traditions that don't use psychedelics at all, but they use other things like vision quests and other ways, techniques and ceremonies that help to break down our way of looking at the world, and once that breaks down, and of course you need to have a proper context to do it, because people can go crazy, right?
Right.
In the wrong context. It has happened, through doing psychedelic drugs or other things, even certain types of meditation exercise without appropriate guidance. If the person doesn't have the the strength and the context and the support that they need when their view of reality starts to break down. They can lose their anchor, and it can take them places where you don't want to go, and sometimes that can have lasting negative effects. So it needs to be done in a very disciplined and step-by-step and guided way. But regardless of what a person feels drawn to, it's not necessary to use psychedelic plants, for instance, to do this. But all plants are teachers, and if we are able to connect with them in a very deep way, they not only do we learn about. It's interesting when you go into and start to really connect with a plant on a spiritual level. People might think, okay, so what you might learn about is that if you make a tea out of it, it's going to have these properties, or if you make a homeopathic remedy or a flower essence, it's going to have these properties, and you can get that kind of information. But plants and beings in nature are also teachers. So when people make those connections in these workshops, very often what they'll get is something much more personal. The plant, giving them a teaching that helps them with whatever it is that they're going through in their in their life at that time, and it may have nothing to do with the physiological or pharmacological properties of the plant. So there's so many different layers to this,
Yeah,
and it's really profound.
it just it fascinates me to no end. Like I I definitely want to take your Spirit of Herbs workshop and learn more. But I'm wondering, like, does each plant have its own kind of unique personality and quote unquote type of wisdom to share? Or is it more kind of like what you were just saying, where it's really individual to the person, what they experience and learn from their connection to this plant?
I would say it's both. To give the examples that I already gave, you could take a plant like a common plant, let's say dandelion. Okay, that's something that everybody's familiar with. Well, if you prepare dandelion as a tea, it has certain physiological properties, and it has some energetic and spiritual properties as well. But when we're focusing more on the physical aspects of it, you get more of the physical properties. You could make it as a tincture, and if you make a tincture from the fresh plant, it will have slightly different physiological properties, and because you're making it from the living plant, the energetics of it is intensified. Now, if you have a living relationship with that plant, whereby, like in my practice, for instance, I don't just use plants because they're there. I use plants because over the years, I've developed a certain relationship with the land where I live and with the plants that live there. And the medicines that want to work with me, they tell me that they want to work with me. So in my practice, I only work with plants that have called me. And that creates a different relationship. And when I'm harvesting them, I'm talking to them and I'm connecting with them and I make offerings to them. And I don't just pick them, I ask permission to pick them. It's a very different kind of relationship. And when you deepen the relationship like that, the medicine deepens as well. Okay,
Wow.
but if you were to take dandelion and make a homeopathic remedy out of it, you will get a different frequency of its properties. And if you made a flower essence of the flower, you'll get a different frequency of its properties. And if you engage with it spiritually, it does have spiritual generic properties that anybody can access. But when your relationship with the plant becomes much more personal, it becomes or it can, if you could say if that's in the cards, but it can become a teacher for you, and that relationship could be temporary, or it could be for a period of time, in which case the teachings that you're getting are more personal, right? Now, for example, in my experience doing the Spirit of Herbs workshops, whenever I run them, what I've learned over the years is that whoever is meant to be at that workshop will be there. It's like a
Right.
calling. It's like on some level, it's an agreement between me and those people and the plants and the land where we do it.
Right.
And when they arrive, they are going to find, like, part of the process is they have to find who are the plants that want to teach with them, that want to teach them at that time. There are certain plants that will tell me that this is something for everyone, and we're going to practice working with them as a group. But then each individual person has a particular plant that's going to be their teacher for the duration of the workshop. And in my experience, that's already predetermined. And then their job with my assistants is to find that plant on the landscape. And then over the course of the workshop, as I'm teaching them different exercises, that plant agrees to work with them. Now, that may be a temporary thing. It might be only for the duration of that workshop, or they may actually initiate a more ongoing relationship, and whereby they will continue to learn things from that plant. But there's so many different layers. Like, at any given time, they could be getting things that are generic. They could be getting things that are personal, and they can get everything in between. And of course, the process becomes one of continually working, so that over time, as the relationship deepens, it's easy to differentiate, what the nature of those different types of information is.
Wow, it's so cool that it's not like a prescribed one way of doing the workshop every time. It's very much you let the plants communicate, and it's that relationship between the person and the plants will dictate what needs to happen, kind of what
Yeah.
what's the best way to heal in that time. So that's so cool.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's amazing. I mean, I've been teaching these workshops, well, in one form or another, since the early '90s, but in the current form, since about 2000 or 2001. And it blows my mind. It's a really powerful learning experience for me. These are my favorite workshops to teach, because they're always pushing me, and I'm always learning new things from it. And of course, there isn't just one Spirit of Herbs workshop. There's four, and each one sort of takes over from where the previous one left off, and goes deeper. There's one, a brand new one. For years, students have been saying to me, can you do one more? Can you do more? And then I sort of got the calling a few years ago that, yeah, the next one is coming in, and I had to be with it for a while and be out on the land and learning and having that connection. And then gradually, the workshop took shape, and that one, which is called Living in Deep Relationship, I ran for the first time last year, and it was awesome.
Wow, it's so funny. Like we're so in sync right now, because it's like you are in taking on my next questions in the most natural, fluid way. Because I was just about to ask you about the Living in Deep Relationship workshop. So that's awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not called the Spirit of Herbs, but it is, it's built up from them. So the
right.
way the Spirit of Herbs works, there's the Spirit of Herbs, which is sort of level one. Then there's one called Advanced Spirit of Herbs and one called Applied. They're kind of like 2A and 2B. You can go from Spirit of Herbs to either one of those, and they're similar but different. The originally Applied Spirit of Herbs was oriented more to practitioners, but I found that people that weren't practitioners were getting a lot from it anyway. So I opened it up. But they cover some similar content, but they approach it in different ways. And some people do one of them, some people do both. But having done either advanced or applied Spirit of Herbs, then you can do Living in Deep Relationship. It's not, it's because there's a requirement that people have sort of learned and had an opportunity to work with some of the things in the other workshops, and so they build from each other. But the living in deep relationship was it kind of is a little bit more. The reason I didn't call it Spirit of Herbs is it's a little bit more divorced from plants, whereas the other three, they deal with all aspects of our relationship with the natural world, but plants are the focus. With living in deep relationship, the plant piece is still there, but they're much broader in their scope. It's about really creating a template of how to how to live in the world. But that template is present in the other workshops, but in living in deep relationship, we go into it in a much deeper way.
Right, like how to implement the learnings in daily life and really
exactly
live what you've learned. And I'm curious, what has been the biggest breakthrough that you've had in your life in working with plants and being part of this work? How has it kind of transformed you?
Wow, that's a very big question. I mean, I'm not sure I can answer it because it's never ending. Right. I mean, it started for me as a child, always having a very strong connection with nature, and then yeah, I also, when I was young in my teenage years, did a lot of exploring of not only Native American traditions, but indigenous traditions and spiritual traditions around the world. And so there were these different threads that kind of came together, and then they suddenly. What actually happened was, I'd spent about 5 months in the early '80s in an ashram in southern India, doing intensive meditation, and then I came back and I went to a particular place on the landscape up north, and it was, let's call it, a power place, right? One thing that all around the world that indigenous people recognize is that there are certain places on the landscape that have, all you could say all of the landscape is sacred and all of the landscape has power, but there's particular places where certain energies are manifest, sacred mountains and springs and lakes and, things that have been recognized all around the world. And the indigenous people in any given region, that's part of their relationship with the land is their calling and recognition that there are particular places where certain type of teachings or medicine is available. And I don't mean medicine in the modern sense. I mean, in an indigenous sense, medicine means it's like a power. It has some kind of purpose. It may not have to do with healing. It might have to do with weather, or it might have to do with with something else. But typically, certain types of ceremonies were performed at these places, and in order to for the people to make a relationship with them and to benefit from whatever it is that those sacred sites have to offer. Well, it turned out there was a place that I went to that I didn't realize at the time was a very old sacred site up on the Canadian Shield, and I was there. I came back from India and I went there and I spent almost 2 months on the land, and I had, just before I left, I had a particular experience there that I could say on some level that was where it all started, although it's not really. It's more like, it started when I was born and I was on this journey, but this doorway opened there. I had done enough work on myself to be able to recognize something, and the land and the spirits of the land communicated to me. And although at the time I could not really articulate anything that happened, it wasn't till later on, as these various threads grew and as my own work deepened, that I suddenly realized that was where it started. And And again, I still can't put into words what happened there. All I can say is that, it's like something, something happened, some doorway opened, and that's what's been playing out in my life ever since. But it's an ongoing process. You're always deepening your relationship, and you're always learning. So it's difficult to say there's this one thing, right?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, but that was a moment that stood out for you where things kind of shifted and like you said, a doorway opened and there's like that energetic shift and that certainty, that knowing, that inner knowing of what you're out to accomplish in life, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at that time, I didn't even know I was going to be a herbalist yet. I started studying herbs because I had some health problems of my own, and I just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper because I loved it. It's like that's happened to me many times in my life where it's like the universe tricked me into something.
Yeah.
It's like it wasn't a conscious choice. It was just my passion just to go into it, and then it was like, oh, that's what's actually really going on here.
Yeah, it just kind of naturally happens, and it's like, okay, I guess this this was the path chosen for me. Right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So I also wanted to ask you, like, if people are thinking about diving into, um, you know, the spirit of herbs and learning more about this, like, is there a way to know, am I ready for this learning, or like, do you have to be ready, or how do you kind of know if this is something for you to explore?
That's a really good question. I would say the fact that it presents itself at all is a good sign, right?
Mhm.
But and this is a very difficult thing for people in our society, and that is that our mind can analyze information, and it can do judgments and things, and it can organize things, and it's a very, very useful tool. But our mind doesn't know; our heart knows,
Mm.
right? And um, we but our mind is part of who we are. So going through and learning about things and studying things and thinking about them, it's a necessary part of the process of how we process things. But in the end, collecting information is an endless endeavor. And no matter how much information you have, you can always get more. And unless you're dealing with something that's pretty obvious, in most of the kinds of decisions that we have to make in our lives, that really matter, you can never really figure them out mentally. At some point, you got to say, okay, I've learned enough about this. Now I've got to just feel into it. And the way the heart speaks is it's more like a knowing. It's not an analysis. And
Mm.
unfortunately, to a large extent, we often experience these things as hunches or intuitions, but to a large extent, the ongoing chattering of our mind often interferes with our capacity to connect with that. And so, that's something that we learn to do. But I would say, you really want to go somewhere or do something that is where you're in a more quiet place mentally, whether it's doing some kind of meditation or be on the land. And if you're making a decision like that, just really feel into it. Do I really feel that this is something for me? And if you do, then go for it. Then you gotta take the leap.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way of describing it. Feeling into it is definitely an ongoing learning for myself, I know, and a kind of a different way of making choices that were not necessarily taught in school, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So as we all know, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and to me, it kind of feels like we're on pause a little bit, to think about the way things are going in the world. So I'm wondering, kind of to sum up everything you've been saying, if the whole world could do this workshop and communicate with plants, what do you think as a collective the plants would say to us? What would that kind of guiding universal wisdom be? What do you think?
um, I would say, I've already said one thing, and that is that we need to come more from our heart than our mind. But I think, the guiding wisdom would be there's a way that the world works, and everything is interconnected. And we've been living from a place of illusion, that we are all individuals and it's all about me. And I can, through science and technology and my mind, I can figure everything out. And also that life is a free for all and we can do whatever we want. And as much as we would like to believe that, and there's a lot of forces at play that want us to believe that, because that's the foundation of capitalism. And it's like it's all that's what keeps the economy rolling. Life is about owning a lot of stuff, and you can have whatever you want, and blah blah blah. And it doesn't really matter what the consequences of that are. But in reality, that's not how life is. First of all, we're not individuals. We're all connected. We're connected to our family. We're connected to our fellow human beings, to all the plants and animals, to the earth, to the sky, and to everything. We're part of an intricate web, and we have our part to play, but it's not all there for our use. We're just one piece in the web, and secondly, that there's a way that the world works. And our survival depends on our capacity to figure that out, and to live our lives in alignment with that. If we as long as we continue to push up against the world as if everything is just a bunch of things that are for our benefit, then it's at our peril. I think there's a tremendous, as unfortunate as this pandemic is, there is also a tremendous opportunity for learning here, to take a step back. It's really interesting to me how one of the things that I find really disturbing is that when you're driving around, you find that there's not that many people walking around outside, and when they are, they're almost 95% of them are going to be they're not even aware of where they are. They're glued to their cell phone. Now, when I'm driving around, I see way, 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 way more people out just walking, and very few of them on their cell phone, which is really interesting. They're actually walking. They're paying attention to where they are. They're walking with other people. They're having conversations with them. It's like being forced to be isolated. We've created a world where we isolate ourselves. Well, what this has done is it's forced us to really understand what isolation is about. And and people are actually finally tired of being on their cell phones and of being locked up inside. And I think, and also realizing the importance of person to person, face to face connection with people, as opposed to social media or whatever. So I think that is, there's an opportunity for learning there. There's an opportunity for learning in, like, all of a sudden, wow, the air is cleaner and it's quieter without all the traffic noise and all of that. And actually that the earth is actually getting a break right now, and the tremendous healing and regenerative capacity of the earth. You hear these stories about, places where it's always, there's always smog, and now the air is clear and they can see the stars. So, the earth has this tremendous capacity to heal, and so do we, as part of the earth. And this is a really powerful kind of moment when we can potentially begin to realign more, or not. But if we don't, it's at our peril, because this is going to happen again, and next time it could be far more serious.
Yeah, and I think too, what's fascinating about this time is, we are on one level even more profoundly aware of how we impact each other, like we have to physical distance because, if we see one person and then they see other people, then we impact those other people that they see. And it's just, to have that kind of real sense of how we impact each other is kind of a profound awakening on one hand, in terms of like reflecting on who we are, who we're being, and what we're contributing or not contributing to the world. So yeah, I think you're right. It's a fantastic opportunity to reflect for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that like you hit the nail on the head. That interconnectedness of things. This is like a little virus that pops up in China and now it's all over the world.
Yeah.
And how we have to think about. Well, wait a minute. I'm going to be seeing my my elderly mother or grandmother, and what I do could potentially affect her. And it's really. It really is making people stop and think about things in a different way, and that that's amazing.
Yeah, totally. So I so appreciate you being on this podcast, Michael. I really appreciate all your wisdom and all the time you've spent, on this path and sharing all your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it. And as we know, this podcast is called Let Beauty Guide You. And one thing I ask all my guests is, what are 3 ways you let beauty guide you in life?
Ah, every time I step out into the world, um, I'm surrounded by beauty, and that is, to me, really profound. If we just stop and be and look around us at the way life manifests. This is such an amazing time. Being spring, and you just see how everything comes to life, and there's thousands of different layers to that, and that to me is really really important, and the importance of allowing the space to connect with that is important for me too. There's unless I'm traveling because my work requires me to travel sometime, or on occasion things are happening that don't allow it. I have made a commitment in my life to go out and be in nature every single day for at least an hour and a half, and to be able to imbibe in that beauty and be fully present in it. So obviously those things are connected, but they're one is the recognition of it, and the other is the commitment to make sure that I'm that is always something that is present for me in my life, and making it a priority. Having to make sacrifices of other things because this is something that is so profoundly important to me, so that I don't know how many that is. That's kind of 2, but a third way is I would say is just going. Those ways have a lot to do with sort of connecting outward. The third way is about connecting inward. I have a meditation practice, and that recognition as well, that all of that beauty that's outside and that manifests in the world is also within myself, because I'm part of the world, and to never forget that.
Totally.
So I would say that those are kind of like the cornerstones for me.
Lovely. Beauty outward and inward, and that being all connected. So that, I think that's a great way to sum up your whole message. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Michael. If our listeners would like to take courses or workshops with you, how can they find you and register for your courses and work with you?
The easiest way to do that is online, obviously. We have a website, which is www.livingearthschool.ca, and there they can, anybody can find access to everything. It links to our Facebook page. I don't have anything to do with that. I actually don't do social media myself, but there's other people that manage that. I do have a blog that links from there, but also there on the website is information on all the different courses, and of course you can link from there to register to them too. We have a lot of online courses, but we have workshops like Spirit of Herbs as well. Unfortunately, right now a lot of workshops are on hold. I'm sort of hoping and praying that by the end of July, when our next Spirit of Herbs workshop is scheduled, that things will be opened up enough that we can go ahead with it.
And if you can, I will definitely be there. That's my plan. I will definitely register.
Great.
As long as COVID allows it, right? Any last words you want to say to us?
I would say that right now, although in some cases I think I think our authorities have done a fairly good job of moving with this crisis, but I feel that the one mistake that they've made is by reducing people's access to outdoor spaces. And I feel that it's really, really important for people to get out and be in nature and not just be cooped up indoors all the time. Of course, doing the necessary social distancing, but getting out there and being around the trees. I mean, especially right now, boy, this is such an important time of year, and to see everything coming alive and the birds arriving and things going into flower. I think that's important for us all the time, but it's especially important right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's so nice to get out, and it's a beautiful way to connect. So, yeah. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to Let Beauty Guide You, the health and wellness podcast with yours truly, Chelsea Keene. If you like this episode, please rate and review it, and of course, share. And we'll catch you for the next episode. Have a good one.